Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I'm going to be reviewing a video by Dante's Boxing Nation today, and he's going to be talking about the Mikey Garcia versus Sandor Martin fight that ended up happening yesterday, and what ended up being one of the biggest upsets that I have personally ever seen, probably in all my years of watching boxing, when it comes down to it. And it'll be very, very interesting to hear what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say. But Mikey Garcia, man, I think that, in my personal opinion, I think that he heavily underestimated his opponent. And on top of that, when it came down to it, I don't think that he had any idea how slick this guy actually was. And I didn't either. Because this guy actually, he was very, very fast. He had very fast feet. He had very good head movements. I cannot recall a whole lot of flush punches that Mikey Garcia landed over Sandor Martin yesterday. But anyways, Dante is going to talk about it. Let's see all in all what he has to say.
Another cherry pick gone wrong. Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Mikey Garcia, who was originally supposed to fight Regis Prograis in what would have been a really big fight for Mikey Garcia, for both Mikey and Regis Prograis, he decided to take a softer touch in fighting a very unknown Sandor Martin from Spain. And boy, did this turn out to be a disaster for Mikey Garcia, because Martin completely outboxed and defeated Mikey Garcia.
He most certainly did. Sandor Martin, he certainly surprised me yesterday. I did not really know anything about him. And this probably has to go down as one of the biggest upsets that I personally ever seen. This is the biggest upset probably of the past 15 years at least. I don't even think it's close. But it is what it is. Unless the Ricardo Mayorga versus Vernon Forrest fight happened somewhere within that time. But I think that happened a little bit earlier on. But anyway.
Martin looked like the Spanish version of Errol Spence or Pernell Whitaker, at least compared to Mikey Garcia in the ring he did. This man, Martin...
Well, I don't necessarily think that Errol Spence and Pernell Whitaker, that they fight super duper similarly. But I understand where you're kind of getting at. Mikey Garcia was thoroughly outboxed yesterday. And this is why I always question this guy's motivation. Now, a certain amount of people overall, they said that Mikey Garcia, that he didn't look in good shape yesterday. The shape didn't really necessarily seem to be a problem for me. Maybe he does have to get in better shape. I'm not necessarily sure. But I think Mikey Garcia, I don't think that he was in the gym training for this guy. What I mean by that is that I think that he was training here and there. I think that he was working on combinations. But I don't think overall that he really looked at a lot of clips of this guy, and I think that he thought that he was just going to knock this dude out within about 4 to 5 rounds. But he surprised him with his speed, he surprised him with his jab, he surprised him with his left hand early. And Mikey Garcia, he looked very horrible yesterday. So it is what it is. I have to give a lot of credit to Sandor Martin.
He was calm, he was poised, his defense was impeccable, he used great foot movement. He got off the ropes with ease. I mean, he did everything in this fight. You can count on one hand how many times Martin got hit flush in this whole fight. Now, Mikey Garcia, he was coming forward. Mikey was looking like Mikey Garcia. But Martin was a crafty, slick southpaw. And that gave...
In my opinion, Mikey Garcia, yes, he was doing what regular Mikey Garcia would do and come forward. But I thought that he looked very, very rusty. And when you come off of a 20-month layoff, which is almost 2 years, a 2-year hiatus, you are going to be a little bit rusty. But on top of that, it was very clear to me that Mikey Garcia did not take this dude that seriously. At least in my opinion. In my opinion. But when it comes down to it, Dante, he tries to say that Mikey Garcia, you notice with the fighter that he doesn't tend to care about, or that he's not trying to protect. What he basically says is that, oh, well, Mikey, he looked the same, but if it comes to one of his boys like a Deontay Wilder or Jamal Charlo, what did he say about them? Oh, they look completely different, but it is what it is. I just found that interesting.
Mikey, a lot of problems. Mikey is known for having a great jab, but Martin, he took that jab away from Mikey Garcia, and the crazy thing is...
He certainly did, but I think Mikey Garcia, if he's going to have a rematch with this guy, he's going to have to risk that. He's going to have to try to out-jab this dude. I don't care what reach advantage he has over you, all in all what he does. He's going to have to be a little bit more defensively responsible. And he's going to have to try to out-jab this guy. He's going to have to get that left hook to the body and the left hook to the face in a little bit, because sometimes Sandor Martin, sometimes he does keep his hands down, And Mikey, he was looking for that left, but this guy, all in all, he was just a little bit too slick yesterday.
Martin was actually jabbing over Mikey's jab and landing the jab. I'm talking about double jabs, triple jabs. I was really impressed, man. I was really, really impressed with Martin's performance. The entire DAZN staff, they had Martin winning this fight. And what was really interesting is, of course, Mikey Garcia, he's going to say at the end of the fight, I thought I won the fight, etc., etc. He said, the guy ran around and I thought I won the fight. But what was so funny is the DAZN reporter, when he interviewed Mikey after the fight, he was trying to make excuses for Mikey. But the problem was the reporter and Mikey were not on the same page. Because as the reporter is trying to make excuses like, yeah, but you had a long layoff though. You think that has something to do with it? And Mikey's like, no, I had nothing to do with it. Because see, Mikey is saying to the reporter, hey man, I just told you I thought I won the fight. You're trying to make excuses for me losing the fight, which means you're telling the world that I lost.
Well, in my opinion, I do think that the 20-month layoff had something to do with it, because Mikey looked completely unprepared for this dude. But I think all in all that he also heavily underestimated his opponent. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether Mikey Garcia, whether he's the same after this fight, because sometimes when fighters like a Mike Tyson against Buster Douglas or an Anthony Joshua against the Andy Ruiz. Now, the Joshua versus Ruiz one wasn't as big of an upset to me, because Joshua, he does have some limitations, but on top of that, Ruiz actually is a decently talented fighter. And, of course, Sandor Martin, he is very talented as well. But Mikey Garcia should have not lost this fight had he took this dude seriously. But who knows, maybe even in a rematch, and if they have a rematch, it's more than likely going to be a 12-round fight. We're going to see how good Mikey Garcia is in that match. We're going to see. I need to see what he does, because now Mikey Garcia's back is truly up against the wall. As Dante said in the early part of the video, this was a cherry pick gone wrong.
So we're not on the same page right now.
And I've always been after Mikey Garcia's ass, like I said, because Mikey Garcia, he's never been interested or serious about any of these elite opponents. As I've always said, he was never interested in Vasyl Lomachenko, and he doesn't seem interested in any of the elite 140-pounders, and he doesn't seem interested in any of the somewhat elite 147-pounders, because if he was, he'd be calling some of them out. What you notice about Mikey Garcia is that he's never called out any of these A-grade fighters. How many times has he called out Vasyl Lomachenko or Gervonta Tank Davis or Devin Haney or Teofimo Lopez or Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez or Regis Prograis or Danny Garcia or Sean Porter or Yordanis Ugas? How many of these guys have you heard him called out? He hasn't called out any of them. None of them.
This is what Mikey was saying to him. Because we already know when it comes to the layoff excuse, Errol Spence came off of a long layoff. And we seen what he did to Danny Garcia. And that was after the car accident where a lot of people thought he would not be the same. And he still...
So why'd you use the same thing for Jamal Charlo? When you said that Jamal Charlo in his last fight, that he just didn't look the same to you and it could have been a layoff. Dante is so full of shit half the time. Not even half the time, 90% of the time. But it is what it is. But I understand Dante's point, but what I'm going to say is this. A 20-month layoff is a hell of a lot more different than only a year layoff. And Errol Spence was only off for about a year. A year layoff, in my opinion, is not really that viable of an excuse, because when it comes down to it, a year is something that you can probably get past. But almost 2 years, that's a very, very, very big hiatus. Very, very big hiatus. But obviously, I think that Errol Spence is on a whole nother level compared to Mikey anyway. So Errol Spence, I think, was going to handle his business better anyway.
Dominated a very game Danny Garcia. Of course, you have the great Floyd Mayweather, who took a 2-year layoff and ended up beating a pound-for-pound top 3 fighter in Juan Manuel Marquez, and this is the same Marquez that knocked out Manny Pacquiao. So the layoff is not an excuse, and that's the reason why Mikey Garcia didn't use that as an excuse. Mikey looked like Mikey Garcia in this fight. He just happened to be fighting someone with a style that he could not figure out.
Well, what I'm going to say is this. He certainly could not figure out his style. There is no doubt about that. Mikey Garcia, once again, I believe that he heavily underestimated this opponent. and that he did not. He probably looked at a couple of clips of this guy and said, okay, he's going to try to move around, but I'm not overly impressed with this guy. And then he got in the ring with this dude and he said, wow, this dude's jab is really fast. Wow, he's hitting me with double jabs. Wow, he's mixing it up to the head and body. Wow, this guy's a hell of a lot more better at movement than I thought. Wow, he's really defensively responsible, and I really can't get my hits in there. And Mikey Garcia, he looked like one of those guys that is trying to swim in a river, but he didn't know how strong the stream was. And then he went in there and then he got drowned. That's basically what he looked like yesterday. And Mikey Garcia, I think he knew that he made a very horrible mistake by overall not taking this guy as seriously as he probably should have. And once again, Mikey Garcia is probably the biggest underachiever that I've seen in all the sports within the past 10 years, at least.
Maybe they'll have a rematch. Maybe Mikey will do better in a rematch. The only thing I could think of is him throwing caution to the wind, but if he does that, he may put himself in a position to where he can possibly get knocked out. As Floyd Mayweather Sr. told me, the quickest way to get knocked out is trying to knock somebody out. Now let's talk about how this fight was scored. One of the judges had this fight scored a draw, and that's unacceptable. Because see, what the boxing world doesn't understand is when you just allow judges to just fly under the radar because the other two judges had it the way it was supposed to go, then that means that this guy can go out and he could possibly take a fight from someone else in the future. And I obviously mean taking away a win.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Wow. My bad. But I agree with Dante there that some of these judges, like the judge that scored it a draw, in my opinion, that he should not be allowed back. But we all know that boxing, we all know that it is the most crooked sport out of any other sport out there. And that was another part of the reason why I was really so surprised that they gave it to Sandor Martin so clearly. I believe this was in Mikey Garcia's hometown, and on top of that, especially a lot of these Mexican fighters when it comes down to it. Now, there is a lot of great Mexican fighters, but usually if there is a close fight, they're going to try to give it to that Mexican fighter any way that they can. Take a look at Canelo Alvarez, for example, in some of his toughest fights. Take a look at Jose Ramirez. Take a look at Julio Cesar Chavez against Pernell Whitaker. I was very, very surprised that Mikey Garcia was judged very objectively yesterday, at least on 2 out of the 3 scorecards.
And from someone who actually deserves it. I mean, there should be a low tolerance level for judges to do things like this. Because a lot of times when fighters get robbed, those decisions are irreversible. Right? And something else I don't like. I don't like when the commentators are watching the fight and they know that one guy is clearly winning the fight, but they keep saying throughout the fight, well, we don't know how the judges have it scored. You're right. We don't know how the judges have it scored. But if we all know that it is clear as day that one guy is clearly winning the fight, then you guys should be clearly saying that this is going to be a complete robbery if this man doesn't win a fight. Because I've heard commentators say this before. I mean, hell, even when it came to Manny Pacquiao versus Tim Bradley, you guys remember that first fight? Where even the referee who ref the fight, he said the fight was so close it could have went either way. But you seen the...
No, it wasn't. But Dante, he was riding on that hill because Timothy Bradley at the time was a black fighter. But or not at the time, excuse me. Of course, he's always a black fighter. But when it came down to, at the time, Timothy Bradley, overall, he was an elite black fighter. So it is what it is. Dante, he keeps riding on that hill. I'm sorry, that fight was never that close. The Jeff Horn versus Manny Pacquiao fight and the Marquez fights I thought were decently close. That first Timothy Bradley fight, no way. No way Timothy Bradley should have won that fight. I'm sorry.
Commentators, HBO commentators, they continuously kept making it seem as if there was no way Bradley was even in the fight. And then even after the fight, they told Bradley to his face that they thought that Manny Pacquiao won the fight. And that was with them being extremely biased. So my point is, in this situation with Mikey Garcia and Martin, you're not even being biased if you say that this will be considered a robbery. Because Martin, he clearly won this fight hands down. It wasn't even close. Because sometimes there are robberies.
I would have to rewatch it, but it was very clear to me, at least with the rounds that I was watching, that Sandor Martin, he was clearly winning this fight.
He's out there that are so close that they really could have went either way. This wasn't that situation. You know, you couldn't give Mikey Garcia any more than 3 rounds, and that's being generous. This guy had Mikey Garcia completely frustrated. And the crazy thing is, Martin actually moved up in weight just to take this assignment against Mikey Garcia. Because he said right after the fight, now I want to go back down to my natural weight. So it's pretty interesting, man. And actually, Devin Haney was there watching the fight, which means he probably was hoping to get a Mikey Garcia fight because he had even called out Mikey Garcia, you know? And now all of that...
Well, there's been a bunch of fighters that have called out Mikey Garcia. Mikey ain't going to fight him. Because like I said, Mikey, he ain't interested in these A-class opponents. He never has been.
Goes down the drain. Once again, Mikey, most likely, I don't know if he's going to take a rematch with this guy, but it's risky to take a rematch with this guy because if he loses in a rematch, then his career is almost over. Because to be someone on Mikey Garcia's level, to lose to a complete no-name cherry, and then come back and lose to him again, oh man.
That would pretty much be a career ender. And I don't think that his confidence would ever be the same again. And once again, it's very clear to me that Mikey, he already has 1 foot out the door in boxing anyway. And by that time, you pretty much should retire anyway. At least, that's my opinion on Mikey Garcia. Could I be wrong? I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Because Mikey, to me, like I said, he's never seemed overly interested in boxing. And a person that has a 20-month layoff, unless you have an injury, that's not a person that's interested in boxing to me. I'm sorry.
It would be really hard for him to repair.
But like when you take a look at Canelo Alvarez this year, now of course the first fight he had against Avni Yildirim, and that was not an elite opponent. But Canelo Alvarez at least always shows that he's interested in facing A-grade opponents. You know, with Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. Who the hell is Mikey Garcia facing?
His reputation. I mean, it's already hard now, but it's going to be way more difficult if he loses in a rematch. So Mikey has a lot to think about. Does he just move past this, like a lot of fighters have done in the past? Fighters like Juan Manuel Marquez, you know, he lost to guys overseas and never even thought about looking back. Next thing you know, he's knocking out Manny Pacquiao, right? So, you know, we'll see what Mikey decides to do. Mikey also may be looking at things like, why even risk losing to this guy in a rematch for less money when I could just go ahead and take a big fight and get a bigger payday?
Could be, because like I said, Mikey, there's not very many big competitive boxing matches that I think that he's super interested in, unless they attract a great amount of money. But it is what it is. I think Mikey, I do think that he is prideful enough, however, to want a rematch with this guy. But I could be wrong. We'll see what happens.
You know, if I'm going to risk losing, I might as well go out with the biggest payday. Maybe he's thinking like that. We'll see. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys.
That's pretty much all I got for today as well. We'll see what happens with Mr. Mikey Garcia. I certainly was not expecting an upset like this. But it is what it is. That's why you always have to put your best foot forward. And you always have to take your opponents seriously. And in my opinion, Mikey Garcia did not do that. But all congrats to Sandor Martin. He completely put on a show. And he pretty much embarrassed Mikey Garcia yesterday. So it is what it is. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to y'all later.